All right, folks, we're going to have a bit of a martial arts talk here. I'm here with Sword Sage, and we're going to look at... Oh, by the way, he also has a YouTube channel. I'll leave the link in the video description down below, so you can go check that out. There's swords and things, so shiny stuff. I know you like that. And we're going to look at a particular video that came up recently that had parts of China outraged, apparently. So there was a fight between an MMA guy and a Tai Chi master. I don't know if you have to put master in quotes. I don't know enough about that, but we're just going to take a look.
And already I'm looking at his thing, wondering what the hell is he doing? And whack, whack, back paddle. And down he goes.
That's it. So, very quick video, obviously. And so a lot of people are really pissed off by this. They feel like it's an attack on traditional Chinese arts and culture and this and that and the other thing. So first off, the two people... I can't actually pronounce the names, so I'm just gonna... Actually, you know a bit more about Chinese pronunciation, don't you?
Okay, so the MMA fighter was named Zhu Xiaodong. Okay. You probably want to put that in like in the text like either text description or like on the screen so people know exactly what I said. But Zhu Xiaodong, he's a Beijing-based MMA fighter. And apparently he's known as a madman by his friends because he's very aggressive, which we could see in the video. The other guy is a dude named Wei Lei, or Wei Lei. I'm pretty sure it's Wei Lei. Could be wrong about that though. And he's the founder of a fledgling thunder style of Tai Chi, which I have not heard of before. At least I've not heard of this new fledgling style of Tai Chi. But
just one thing that I want to make really clear here before people jump to conclusions. Like, I have no intention of ripping the guy or anyone here, really. Like, first off, kudos to both of them, and particularly the Tai Chi guy, really, because... This is the sort of situation where the traditional martial artist has everything to lose and the MMA guy doesn't. Yeah. Because MMA, it's mixed martial arts. People will not jump to conclusions based on, you know, if he loses, people won't necessarily say that, oh, MMA is crap. They are more likely to say, oh, this particular guy just isn't very good. However, because the other person... quote-unquote represents Tai Chi in the eyes of most viewers, if he loses, a lot of people will say, see, that proves that Tai Chi is garbage. Yeah. You know, not to mention that there are different styles of Tai Chi and all of that. So I definitely have to give him credit for accepting the challenge, because there's a lot of pressure on them. I mean, okay, there's always, whenever there are different styles competing, there's always lots of pressure. It's just a bit less so, at least as far as I see it, in MMA, because there's a mix anyway. So yeah. There's always this problem whenever anybody of different styles, two people compete, then there's always the pressure of, hey, you gotta represent this thing. You know, even though the one win or loss tells you nothing. It's statistically insignificant. I'm sure you have something to say about it because you have more of an insight into Chinese martial arts than I do.
I'm not surprised by this outcome for one very simple reason that I'm pretty sure most of the people watching this already know. Too many traditionalists don't really train to fight. It's not just Chinese arts. I see it everywhere, but it is rather endemic with Chinese arts. I will admit that. Too many of them don't actually learn to fight, like actually condition their bodies and go up against somebody who is not just going to stand there and let them demonstrate their movements, like actually rough each other up to make sure that their techniques actually work. You don't see that too much. The guy may think that he's a master because he's, you know, or maybe he is in a certain aspect, like if it comes to this demonstrating the movements, demonstrating the forms, maybe he knows it very well, maybe he can do it in a very picturesque way where it looks pristine, picture perfect doing the movements, but then when it comes time to actually fight, you can tell just by the way he was standing there in the ring, he was not prepared. Mm-hmm. The way his arms were extended, you know, how his legs were moving, and the second the guy just rushed in at him, he was backpedaling like crazy because it's like, oh shit, oh shit. Mm-hmm. That's not somebody prepared for something like that. Another MMA fighter or a boxer or anyone who's used to being in the ring, getting roughed up, maybe an onslaught like that would make them backpedal a bit, but not in that kind of panic sort of way where, oh shit, what the hell do I do? They would try to at least slip some of those punches.
Yeah.
Or, at some point stand the ground.
You could see that he was trying something. Like, you could definitely see that he was trying to apply certain techniques, but it's just, he couldn't deal with that level of aggression. Okay, so let's take a look at how this went here. So the Tai Chi guy obviously has his posture, very collected. The footwork, there you can see his footwork breaks down. Yeah. The moment he's aggressively pushed, his footwork is all over the place and he does not move anymore. And this is also why he falls. Yeah. You can see right there that, because he does not know how to react in time, there is a moment where it just completely breaks down and he does not have control over it anymore.
You know what's really funny to me? He pulls off one technique, just one. And this goes to show the problem when you have the whole mindset of, all I'm going to do is demonstrate a technique on a non-resisting partner. When the guy first charges in, if you notice, just as the MMA guy starts charging in, the guy slips to the side and lets the guy get past him, which is a standard kind of kung fu technique. Like, you just get him past that way. Yeah, there is. The thing is, you're then supposed to follow up. Like, you got either tie him up or kick him in the back or then rush him down that way or trip him. He doesn't do that. He looks like he was going to do something, but then the MMA guy hit him with a jab in the face, and that was the first moment. Yeah, that was the first moment that threw him off, that confused him, and then he was being pushed so hard and chased that he couldn't get a firm foothold. And this also, by the way, is something that applies to a lot of things when people practice footwork. This even applies to shooting, for example. There are people who will tell you that, okay, you have to assume this exact stance, this weight distribution, this posture, etc., which is all good if you want to increase your accuracy, etc., and follow-up shots and all of that. This is all, like, for competition, yes, 100%. This is all good. But if you train for self-defense, etc., then you also have to train in awkward positions. You have to train where, like, you're leaning off to the side, like maybe leaning around the corner of a wall or something. Or you need to be able to shoot from a position where you're compromised, where you're off balance, you're kind of standing weirdly, etc. And this is also exactly what sparring does. In sparring, you will end up in awkward situations where you cannot get your footwork completely right. You don't have the correct balance. You don't have this and that and the other thing. You have to make do with what you've got there. And this is what, if they don't do that in Tai Chi, for example, if they don't do sparring, and as I said, I personally haven't seen it so far, then they don't necessarily learn how to deal with these oh shit moments where things just don't go their way. Yeah, and another problem is just the simple fact that they got to get used to getting hit. Like you yourself said, that jab messed up whatever momentum or whatever he was thinking he was going to do. When he got popped, it fell apart. Like, whether it was a light hit, whether it was a heavy hit, whatever, if you're not sparring, that means you're not used to getting hit. And it's not even in your head that I might get hit. You're thinking my technique's going to be invincible. He's going to do some move, and I'm going to just counter, and I'm going to drop him, and it's going to be great. No, real fights is a lot, oh, shit. Now your mind is in shock. Your body's in shock. Like, you weren't prepared for that sting on your nose or that stunning feeling on your forehead. And while you're trying to mentally recuperate, all you're doing is going on basic instinct. You're just backing up, you're backpedaling, or you're like this, giving the other guy perfect opportunity to do whatever it is that they're going to do to you. Because you're not prepared to get hit.
And that's what really shows in the video. That there is really this moment that you can see where he goes from this confident... let's just call him a master, because I don't have any way to verify his background, whatever. So he goes from that. He knows what he's about to do. He knows his techniques and everything. You go from that to pop. There it goes. And he defaults to... It looks almost like he defaults to untrained person, the way he moves. Yeah. And you can tell that he's not get used to that. And there are plenty of situations in sparring where, you know, you gotta deal with that somehow. I mean, I know what it's like when I quite often when I look at sparring footage afterwards in HEMA, I'm like, oh, my footwork was falling apart. What the hell was I doing? If you just go, I'm off now, I can't do this thing now. Oh, I've lost. If you think like that, then you're done. You need to figure out ways to
and
recover.
The sad thing, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut in.
Which, of course, is more relevant for unarmed martial arts because you have a chance to recover. In armed martial arts, you don't. If they get a hit on you, you're probably already in the process of dying. You may not drop dead immediately. You may still be able to fight for a while, but essentially, as soon as you took that cut to your leg or your torso or something, or even your neck, essentially you're on a timer. And you've already lost because you probably won't survive, especially in historical times where medicine was crap. You probably would die of your wounds. So that's it. There is no second chance. In unarmed martial arts, if you're used to it, if you're quote unquote tough enough and you've done enough sparring that you can recover from a number of punches and kicks and all of that, if it's not completely debilitating.
Yeah, this is why drills are so important also, because, I mean, unless you really, really trained hard, you know, for the fight and you're prepared to get hit and just blitzkrieg your way through, or like, okay, I got hit, I just collect yourself and get in there. There are going to be times, you know, where they might do something that you just did not expect. And now you find yourself backpedaling, or now you're having to reassess or regroup, and the guy's still coming at you. He's not, especially a good fighter, the minute they sense weakness, they're going to just charge in. So having certain defensive motions drilled into you when you're suddenly like, you know, you're going through a blue screen of death and your mind is trying to reboot, having your limbs instinctively know where to go during that time is very freaking useful. And you can only get that way through constant drilling and constant training, which unfortunately a lot of traditional guys don't do, at least not in a sparring context, which again is the problem. If you're not training to actually fight, you're screwed. And the problem with training to fight, especially an MMA guy, I mean, there's so many different levels of martial arts training. It's not just, oh, I train for health and train for exercise, and this guy goes, well, I train to fight. Well, how exactly? Are you going to the gym and busting your ass every other day or every day? Like, are you training the way a heavyweight would train for a match coming up? Because if not, you already are at a disadvantage against somebody who is. The MMA guy, if he's an MMA guy, that means that's his life. He's going in there, hitting the heavy bag, you know, rolling around with somebody else, having his limbs tied up in knots, or tying other people in knots, getting his nose smashed in there a couple of times. He's ready for it. His body's conditioned, his mind is conditioned, and he's ready to go. If you're not training like that, you better hope you got some really good technique to take that dude down, because you're not mentally prepared for it. And you probably aren't physically prepared for that either. So you better have that one ace in the hole, or you're going down. It's a simple fact. There's a reason why I don't call, despite the fact that I've been training martial arts for a while, the last thing I would ever say is, oh, I'm going to take an MMA guy on. I haven't been in the gym in a while. You know, I got a family life. You know, I try to get in what training I can, but I'm not doing what I used to do when I was 22, 23, 24 years old. And I'm most certainly not in the ring every day. So for me to even think, because of what I know, I can fight at him. No way. I'm going to get destroyed. I'm not at that same level that they're in.
Yeah, and that's very important, in my opinion, to be aware of your limitations. I mean, same here. I still, at this point, it's still me against myself. I'm still working on fixing my body and getting into better shape. And I still need to practice a lot to get rid of plenty of bad habits and standard mistakes, etc., etc. I'd be in no shape to like challenge anybody in this big, oh yeah, I'm gonna kick your ass, let alone the fact that it's an obnoxious and unproductive attitude in the first place. If you want to practice with somebody else, if you want to fight somebody, the focus should not be on, I'm gonna beat you. The focus should be on, what can I learn from you? Or
Yeah.
what can I learn from this experience, from this fight? How can I improve? How can I grow from this? Rather than just stroking your ego, because that's bullshit. Despite of what I'm saying about comparing styles, that you can't really jump to conclusions, there are certain things that you can observe when you actually look at how the style is practiced. Now, individual practitioners, there may be Tai Chi practitioners who do full contact sparring where they try to deal with such aggression. I haven't seen it myself, but I also haven't really looked into it. So maybe there is, maybe there isn't. If there isn't, then of course you can make some general statements about the art and how, I mean, let's face it, if there is a martial art that calls itself a martial art, there are different opinions about what that means, of course, but if they don't do sparring against a fully resisting opponent, it's going to be extremely limited for self-defense, and it's also going to be limited for a competitive context in which the opponent is not going to comply, is not going to let you perform your techniques, which is good for practice and all, but it's not realistic. Why don't you practice the way you spar, and why don't you spar the way you practice? There may be reasons for it that I don't know. I just find it odd, personally.
There's usually two reasons for this. One is because the techniques that they're actually employing when they're sparring is actually the technique that they're training in, but they're doing it in a more truncated, more direct way. A basic example I can give is, at least for instance, I've noticed this a lot with weapons training. You start out with really big motions to get your body used to doing it, and then when you actually fight it, you do it in a much smaller way. Circular cuts, for instance, you'll see people doing it full arm at first when they're doing drills. Like they'll have them march in a line, do 10 of them in a row this way, and then turn around, do 10 of them in a row that way. And they're doing these full arm extension swings or chops or cuts, which are heavily telegraphed if you're going to be doing it in a real fight. But then when they're in a real fight, they do it from the wrist. Or if they're going to extend it, they'll do it from the elbow, but they're not going to go, because that leaves them wide open. It's basically the same technique, but now they made it smaller because they now understand how the motion's supposed to be used. Usually you train big and then you fight small. So that's one reason. The other reason is there's just a much more basic answer that I'm pretty sure everybody already thought of, and it's just the fact that they don't know how to fight with their style. And that's something I've seen a lot. You'll see somebody training in some esoteric or traditional style, and then when they get there and they're sparring, they're using Taekwondo techniques. Like you just see, like I'll see these guys, from these kung fu schools that have all these complicated, really cool hand motions, and then you put them in the ring, and it's kick after kick after kick after kick. They're constantly leading with their leg, which is actually in a lot of the Chinese styles is a kung fu no-no. Like you don't lead with the kick, you end with the kick. So it's weird seeing that, and it's because they don't know how to apply those techniques. But this other style already is tried and true in the ring, so we might as well borrow some of those techniques and throw it in our style and say it's ours. I mean, we got a sidekick too, so it's our sidekick, even though you're employing it in a Taekwondo sort of way. Or how, their traditional stance would be something out to here, and their hands are like this. And then when they're in the ring, they knuckle up. Suddenly they're boxers, or suddenly they're Thai fighters. It's because it's like, okay, well, I don't know how to employ this, but this style worked in the ring, so I'll just try to adapt those techniques, and that's what they use.
I remember the first time I saw MMA, actually way back. I was a little confused when I, learned that supposedly these people have all different styles. I'm looking at it like, they all look the same, and it looks primarily kickboxing and jiu-jitsu, and there are only so many things that consistently work. At this point, of course, you can also potentially argue that, well, MMA has been around for so long, it's kind of certain tendencies are established. Like they're not willing to experiment anymore because experimenting will get them to lose fights, essentially. So they stick to what has proven itself. That's the drawback of the highly competitive environment. There isn't really that much room necessarily for experimentation, I think.
Yeah. In fact, what you're saying right there is like that's something that I've constantly bumped into. No matter what style you train in, if you're really serious about using it in a combative way or even in a sport way, but you're still using it against someone else, sooner or later you're going to fall back on just the tried and true techniques, and they tend to be universal. No matter what other kind of crazy techniques they may add on top of that, you find that many of these other techniques are either superfluous stuff that somebody just made up in their head, or they're complicated techniques to counter some other complicated technique. Like, what if he does this? I'm fast enough to do this. Or maybe it's something that they picked up for some one weird esoteric fighter who just happened to have this one crazy ass technique that only he could pull off, but it gets married into the style. But more or less, things always get distilled at the highest levels. Things get distilled down to the most direct or the most practical or the most efficient techniques. Sooner or later, they all end up looking very similar because certain things are just going to work. A good way I guess I could describe it to somebody who's not necessarily martial arts minded, but they may be into video game stuff. If it's a hard concept to understand that no matter what your style, it ends up looking kind of similar. Think of competitive video games. Almost any competitive video game you think of. There are so many different ways to play them. But sooner or later, you're going to end up with stuff that everyone says is this is the high tier stuff, this is the mid tier stuff, this is the low tier stuff. You want to compete in the tournament level, you stick with the high tier stuff. And it's always a limited set of things, especially in fighting games. 3D fighters are all about controlling time. The 2D fighters are all about controlling space. I know there's overlap between the two, but if I'm going to boil them down to their essence, that's what I mean. And what do you mean by 3D games is controlling time? Well, you're obviously trying to pick the one move that has the faster frames than the other one, right? The person who comes up with, who leads with a technique that has too many freaking recovery frames is going to get popped by a guy using a technique in the game that has faster frames. And anyone who's played fighting games knows exactly what I'm talking about. And when you start seeing, like, let's say you're watching Evo and you're watching the top 8 at Evo, yeah, there's certain flashy, crazy combos that these experts can pull off because they've been training it for a long time. But notice before they're able to pull off those crazy combos, they're doing a lot of basic stuff first, the stuff that's not going to leave them wide open. A few jabs here and there, constant sidestep, and going with the footsie techniques to hit them on the, where they're weak, like low kicks or whatever. It's fast stuff to leave them wide open or to trick them into doing some big move so that they can knock them in the air and do whatever fancy juggle combo. And the fancy stuff only comes out after they've already opened the guy up and hit him pretty hard with something, that's, knocked them flat because they left themselves wide open, which is what you see in real fights. You got all these crazy techniques and people at the lower levels are showing off their flashy spin kicks and jumping through the air and all that type of stuff. Some people do it just, they're playing around with each other and it's a game. And then later on, you got the people who are either they're doing this, they're military minded or they're, independent contractors or whatever, who are using these martial arts in a very deadly way. And they don't even call it martial arts because they don't want to give that what they consider a negative connotation of all those guys in pajamas who, they don't know how to fight. Me, I know how to take somebody down. I use combatives, but it's pretty much the same stuff. It's just a higher level stuff from these older arts. And the same thing in the ring. They're not necessarily trying to kill each other, but they're still trying to use the most effective ways of taking the other guy out without leaving themselves wide open or draining themselves too much of their stamina. And that only leaves you a certain amount of techniques to do. You will always see that in any form of competition.
At the higher skill levels, so to speak, there is also a tendency to use some of the fancier stuff. Again, they're complex techniques, but that's because it takes you that long to be able to pull them off. There are plenty of techniques in HEMA as well, where, okay, so you demonstrate the sequence, and everybody goes, you can't pull that off in sparring. And most people, yeah, true, they will not pull that off. There's no way they don't have the experience, they don't have the practice, etc., etc. Yeah. They can't pull it off. However, the highest ranks, they will, especially if they're fighting somebody who has less experience than them and they know it, then they can play around, so to speak. Apparently, basic things can be taken to an extremely high level. And of course, that's exactly what happens in MMA and such. That's why a lot of things look similar, because there are certain very direct ways of throwing punches, for example. I mean, the jab and cross. There aren't really any variations, especially with gloves. How can you vary that? I mean, the jab is literally, the purpose is the quickest thing you can possibly do. The quickest way to get there from point A to point B is a straight line.
Yeah,
you cannot speed it up. The only way you can speed it up is by training yourself so that you physically become quicker and stronger and all of that. But there is no way in which you can possibly make the jab more effective at what it's supposed to do. Straight line, goes in and out quickly. That's it. In self-defense, you can talk a lot about different ways. Like, do you do a palm strike? Do you strike with your fist? Do you strike with particular knuckles, etc., etc.? But of course, in boxing and MMA, that's not so much a concern.
Yeah.
So there's only so much you can do. With a hook, for example, you can clean up your body mechanics to make it as efficient as possible. But of course, it's still going to be one of the slower types of punch because it goes in an arc. It does not go straight. So there are only so many things you can do, of course.
A lot of the heavier hitting things or the fancier looking things that, can wow a crowd or, really get people going, oh, wow, he got him with a really good move, are usually techniques that the guy doesn't see coming. And usually they don't see it coming or aren't prepared for it, either because they are inexperienced or because they got set up. Mm-hmm. And again, I find this in so many different, whether it's martial arts or whether it's a game or whatever, you usually end up messing the guy up because they didn't see it coming or they weren't prepared for it or they left themselves wide open for it.
Yeah. All right. Sometimes it also happens just because they get exhausted. That's what you see pretty often in MMA, where you get this like spinning roundhouse kick or spinning back fist or something. This sort of thing where as an observer from the outside, you see it coming from a mile away. Holy shit, why is he turning? Why is he presenting his back? But if they're tired enough and they have been at it for a while, they may still be caught off guard. And sometimes there's probably this final moment of, oh shit, like they see it right before it hits them. Things like that. It happens. It really pays off to think outside the box, so to speak. I mean, particularly when it can be fruitful to practice with somebody who has a different background, because then they will throw things at you that you normally don't have to deal with. So there can be a tendency, if you just stick to within your own style and you're used to the things that they will do to you in practice and sparring and all of that. But especially if you think about going up against somebody who practices MMA, or if it's in a self-defense situation on the street, you will have to be prepared for these bull rushes, essentially, because that is quite likely to happen. If you can't deal with that, then you need to practice more, and you need to be aware of that, essentially. And I think that's also in this case what happened. Occasionally I've seen cases where somebody like the quote-unquote master in the dojo would just demonstrate something and it doesn't work, and then he's like, no, you're doing it wrong. You have to attack me in such and such a way. And it's like, why? If you can't deal with that, then the fault is not on the student's part or on whoever is attacking you. Then you need to do something different. Yeah. That really bothers me.
It has to adapt. Yeah. I hate seeing, it has to be done this way. If I know a technique actually has merit, I know a lot of people criticize when people are demonstrating techniques on someone just standing there. And while I am one of those people saying that if you're going to be training, you need to train against a resistive opponent, you also need to know what the hell to do first. That's why the person's standing there. They're basically being a dummy of showing you, okay, this is the picture perfect way of how the technique is actually supposed to work. Now, fights aren't going to end up this way. The guy's not going to hold out his arm. So what do you do when it actually hits? Well, here's this variation. Here's that variation. Here's doing it from this way. Here's doing it from that angle. When I see that, that's when I'm like, okay, this technique might have some merit. But if they only do it that one picturesque way, doing it the same way with the guy just standing there the same exact time, that's when I'm like, okay, either the guy doesn't know what the hell they're doing or the technique is bullshit.
Yeah.
It's usually how you can tell.
Definitely, yeah. Yeah, there are some grappling techniques in HEMA where it becomes immediately apparent if you do it this particular way and the other guy is very strong and just tightens up and resists, then you're not going anywhere. However, when that happens, there is the motto, if you can't move the mountain, you move around it. So if you can push them to the side, you push yourself off them, and you will still get in a comparable position. You will still get off to their side, but instead of moving them, you're moving yourself, and you're kind of springing off them, so to speak, which is definitely a way to do it. And the other thing is, quite often you need to break their structure first. You got to do something to throw them off balance in such a way that they cannot engage their muscles and resist in the way they would normally do.
Yeah.
But yeah, now it's getting really technical. We should probably leave it at this. It's already pretty long. There's lots of things to talk about, of course, always. But yeah, let me know what you think about this kind of video, folks. Do you want to see more of that? We're even thinking about doing a semi-regular podcast thing potentially. So things like this would definitely be an option. All right. Thanks for watching, and thanks for joining in.